So, Jordan, I like to start by reading to my guests back something that they wrote online. And for you, this is what I went through your Instagram, and you say this: it is not unkind or unchristian to say no. That post got nearly 10,000 likes, and it struck me because I think that is really unique perhaps to the Christian experience to feel bad for putting a boundary. So I was wondering if you could expand on that a little bit for us.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's very in line with what you just said. I think I think as Christians, sometimes we want to be servant hearted. We know we're called to serve. We want to give. We want to go above and beyond. But I think sometimes we don't know the difference between, or we have a hard time determining the difference between, kindness and serving, and also then being a doormat or overextending ourselves to where I think what can happen sometimes is even as Christians, the reality is we're still human and we can burn out, we can overwork, we can pour from an empty cup. And I think what can start to happen is we actually start doing things with resentment or bitterness in our heart because we said yes to it and it sounded like a great idea at first, but now we're 3 months into some commitment that we really knew we probably shouldn't have added to our plate. So now we're showing up begrudgingly. We're showing up maybe even frustrated or just trying to keep our head down and get through whatever, maybe it's a volunteer activity or a social thing or whatever it may be, and people can read that. So I guess I've had to learn the hard way that sometimes it's actually better to say no to things that really aren't right for the season of life that you're in, or that would be too much, to where if you audit the opportunity or the request in front of you and you're like, I don't think I have the capacity to really show up genuinely and well and like from a place of overflow, that actually would probably be better to say no to, so that in the things I am doing I can show up with the love of Christ, so that I can show up as as a way as abil- with the ability to really serve, I guess is the way I'm trying to say it, without necessarily that bitterness or that exhaustion starting to taint the experience, or the impact we might be able to have. So I guess the heart behind it is sometimes the nicest thing you can, or the most Christian thing you can do, is say no. I look at how Jesus lived. He took space. He didn't just do everything he was requested to do. So I think we can learn from that. And I think we can and take that and remember, like, maybe not feel good. We may not, please everyone. But I think in learning how to find the right things to say yes to and then saying no to the wrong things, we're going to be able to give so much more of what matters to the things that we have said yes to already.
Walk me through for you how maybe that philosophy has even progressed through your own professional rise and success, right? Because I think I had a mentor once say to me that like the person that you want to be 20 years from now, be that person now, assume the role. And so maybe in the beginning, did you say yes to everything and then you learned it's not sustainable, or just walk me through that progression for you?
Well, especially professionally, I feel like a lot of what I started with kind of it all kind of evolved as an accident. Like I just thought it was going to be this hobby, maybe a little side hustle, and it just kept growing and evolving. And as that was happening, it was exciting. And I also was newly, graduated from college, needed a bank account that needed funding. I also was on fire for the Lord and trying to like do all of these impactful things. So I found that I was just saying yes to pretty much every opportunity that came across my plate because I didn't want to miss my opportunity. I was like, okay, well, yeah, we'll add that. And sure, I'll come speak for free. It's fine. We'll figure it out. I was just doing one thing after another. And some of those things ended up being really worth it. Some of those things were good. So it's sometimes kind of a judgment call on like, should I go for it? But I kind of then I hit a place of burnout a few years in, and I was like, okay, if it's truly like a God-given opportunity and it's something that's meant for me, it's not going to pass me by. And if I have to say no because my plate is full or, I just don't have the capacity, then I have to trust that like it's not the end of the road and it's not my one and only opportunity. And so I started to identify the things that felt right to say yes to in this season and the things that were like, unless it meets this criteria, I'd probably need to say no. Things like traveling to speak and things that were a little bit more of a commitment and wore on me physically, wore on me, mentally, emotionally, versus, doing a podcast interview or something. So I just had to kind of start gauging what are the things that are realistic to say yes to versus what are the things that maybe I need to have some criteria to say yes to? And even some of the simpler things, I also had to start looking at it seasonally because if I was in the middle of a book launch or in the middle of a month that I had just, it was very full, I had to start telling my assistants and my team, like, hey, afternoons are off for me. Like I'm not off from work, but I'm not doing calls or interviews because I need that time to pour into this project that I have a deadline on. So I kind of had to learn the hard way through adrenal fatigue and burnout and like even starting to resent working in the faith space personally. I started to feel like, oh my gosh, this is so annoying. People are not representing Jesus well. Like I was so irritated by it all. And I started to realize like that's probably a red flag. Like I'm getting really annoyed by the people I genuinely love serving most of the time. So that was kind of between that and also experiencing some actual real burnout that was proven to me physically through a medical exam and some blood work and stuff. Um, I really started to make the shift at that point. And it's a work in progress. You know, there's times where I probably still say yes to things and I'm like, that probably wasn't the best yes. But I try to be a lot more intentional and discerning about the decisions that we do take on because there's constantly, especially as things grow and evolve, there's constantly a hey, do you want to speak on this summit? Hey, do you want to come to this conference? Hey, can you? And those are all like it's such a gift to have those opportunities, but we've gotten to the point where I think now we say probably no 60 to 70% of the time. And before it was more like 90% of the time we were saying yes. So
Right. You encourage people who are caught in the tension of where they started and where they want to be to use this as a period to slow down, kind of what we're talking about, and gain clarity. What did that process, what did the slowing down process look like to you? And you seem like a high energy person. So as you're slowing down, did it feel like I'm losing, but you're actually gaining?
A little bit. You know, I feel like I walked through some suffering. I walked through multiple losses, pregnancy losses. I walked through right around the same time COVID hit. So it was like there was a lot of just traumatic experiences in the hospitals and like just various different things kind of all back to back really close. And it was so jarring for me to feel like there was this global crisis happening and fear everywhere on top of my own personal crisis and surgical experiences that went sideways and all of these things. And to be honest with you, I think part of my experience as a high energy person, it's like I could cognitively know I should probably slow down. And it wasn't until I walked through something that honestly laid me flat on my back to where I like didn't have any other option. And it was like so jarring for me that that was the first time I actually had the chance to pause and like look around and reevaluate and really consider like how do I need to be doing this differently and what do I really value and where am I going from here and what are we doing and why? Because otherwise, I think when we just, are just doing one thing after another and living life as usual and doing business as usual, um, we don't really stop to think about that because there's always one thing after another that we need to take care of or that we're responsible for or that we have an opportunity to take charge with. And so all of that said, it was through something that really kind of laid me flat on my back. I was like forced to slow down. It was like a choice in that I knew it was something I needed to do, but I really don't know that I would have had something not so jarring kind of been the thing that made me pause and made me be like, wait, life just blew up in my face. What do I do with this? And how do I pick up the pieces and pick up the right pieces and maybe leave the ones that are not necessarily right or not helpful in this situation? So I always say adversity can create clarity. And I really believe that's true because that was kind of the result of my own experience. Not only did it force me to slow down, it kind of forced me to step back and take a look around. And I think we can do that in any kind of setback or disappointment. It doesn't always have to be tragedy or deep, deep suffering. I think sometimes the setbacks in our life or the disappointments we walk through they feel like huge obstacles and in many ways they are, but I also think they hold a really unique opportunity that we otherwise don't get because we're just on the hamster wheel of life doing the next thing. And it's when something sets us back or is jarring and kind of makes us look around that maybe we get the first opportunity to slow down. And I know that was my experience anyway.
In that experience with the miscarriages, being a public figure, what did that process look like as far as deciding, I'm going to share this too? Because you didn't have to do that.
So the first time that it happened, I thought it was a complete fluke. And I was like, this surely won't happen again. I'm 25, I'm young, I'm healthy to my knowledge. And so I shared that just because I felt like, I think the hard thing about something like pregnancy loss and miscarriage is like there's this, it's almost like a unseen grief. And I think that for me, like, was the challenge. It's almost like there's not a validation for so many. And I was thankful to have some family and friends that were very validating of the experience. But I realized, like, wow, like if you don't have people who view life the same way or who don't value it in the same way, like it could be a very isolating experience. So that's kind of what led me to share my experience and really speak on it from a first, from my perspective. But then when it happened again, I was actually much further along. I was into my second trimester at that point. And so we had done our announcement photos, like, all of that. And so when that one happened, I mean, the first one was sad. The first one was heartbreaking. The first one was kind of shocking. But I didn't feel despair. I felt like, okay, this is a hard experience. I know I'm not alone in it. I'm going to share it to encourage others that they're not alone. And we're going to move on and we're going to go have babies. Like that was kind of where my head was. And 2 months, 3 months later, I got pregnant again and everything was progressing as normal, had 3 or 4 completely normal ultrasounds, got to the point where we were seeing like arms and legs kicking and everything. So it was like real, it was happening. And I hope this isn't triggering for anyone who's walked through something similar, but maybe put a trigger warning on that. But you know, it was just like this completely shocking thing. It was completely routine ultrasound right around like 13 and a half, almost 14 weeks. And we, were at that point. And so, anyways, all of that said, it was so jarring and so traumatic for me. But part of the reason I chose to share that one is because at that point I felt like I didn't really have a choice. And the reason for that is we had pretty much told all like colleagues, family, friends, all of that kind of stuff. But also the other reason I chose to share it on social media is because I knew like it was going to disrupt all the plans that I had for the summer and a lot of the things that I had already started doing with my community. For example, at the time I was running live workshops and I knew it was going to disrupt some of the timing of that because I was like, there's no way I can jump on a workshop next week and like teach this. So I didn't want to make some vague, like, hey, we're going through some hard things type post because I knew that would lead to a lot of speculation of like, are they getting a divorce? Is there a scandal? Like, what's going? So I just felt like I just need to put out what's actually happened. Um, and I don't know if that's entirely true. Like, I look back, I'm like, I don't know why I thought that. Like, I had to share that so quickly, but I felt like I just wanted to be honest and transparent. And in some ways, I think it was good to share. I also felt like though there was a downside to that because then I took a long break. I felt like, okay, I need to figure out what's going on. This maybe isn't a fluke. At that point, I felt complete despair. And I think the downside to sharing at that time was that I then started to feel like I was labeled the miscarriage girl. Like everyone wanted me to give them advice on miscarriages and I was like, I don't know, I'm just trying to survive this. So there's pros and cons to sharing that. I think overall I'm glad I have shared my story. But it definitely came with some downsides and challenges I hadn't anticipated and I kind of had to stop talking about it for a while. For about a year there I just like refused to talk about it. I didn't give any updates. And I think that was actually pretty healthy and helpful to say, okay, now I'm drawing a boundary. Like, okay, now I'm not giving you live play by plays of everything. So, anyway, that's a long winded answer, but it was kind of different in each case as to why I chose to share.